on. Right when I start, Hangout on Air is now live. And my dog just started barking. It's really incredible how she does that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen. And this is Mowgli Mateen.
And he is less barky than Luna right now, apparently. In general, it seems like. He's a quieter dog. Not so barky.
Yeah, he's pretty quiet. His full name is Mowgli McMoogface Mateen.
Excellent.
Because we got him right when Buddy McBoatface was a thing. So.
Well, hey, you don't have to explain it to me. It seems really self-evident. It's aesthetic beauty is its own justification.
But we'll always remember when Bodie McBoatface was a thing because of his name. We'll remember that's why we named him that.
Nice.
Right, Mowgli McMoogface. On to Survivor.
So this continues to be a pretty good season, I think. Exciting stuff happening.
Yeah. This was a good episode. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I fall right in between, like, David and Ken. Like, because Ken obviously had decided, we just need to move on and deal with what we're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And David did not want to accept that. And Ken even, like, because you even saw at the end, like, Ken kind of gave him a look like, oh, really? We're using that now?
Mm-hmm.
And I fall, like, in between. Like, I get Ken's point is, like, not that he made a point, but I understand, like, where he's coming from in that, is this really the time to be doing that? Like, does it really...
Yeah, well, especially using it on behalf of someone else who explicitly didn't trust you.
Right. So, but I see where David's coming from in that he doesn't want to be always playing from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
He sees that maybe this is a chance to get her to friggin' listen to him because, hey, I told you, not only did I say what was going to happen and you betrayed me, but I was so confident that I used my idol to save you when what I told you would happen happened.
Right.
You'll probably listen to me from now on.
Well, hopefully.
So if that happens, and it could build a bond between the three of them that actually makes this very worth it. At the same time, I kind of like, there's a lot of game and there's a lot of things like tribe mix-ups. Like, do you really need to be doing that right now when you're probably not next and you could still have it next time if you do become next?
Yeah.
So,
especially since they had already also promised to jump ship and go with the millennials if given the opportunity when they had the tribe summit last week.
Right. So it would have been more advantageous to kind of wait that out and hold on to the idol, I think. However, I also like that he did it and made it interesting. And
I think it's an interesting question from a strategic perspective because I think you could really make both arguments for it. I think one side, though, the side in favor of what he did is really a gamble, though, because it's so dependent on Jessica's response to it. Because he clearly feels that not only do they need an ally, but that she would be a good one if they could persuade her.
Yes.
And I think that that's probably true, but it's a gamble because it relies on the behavior of someone else who, at least as of right now, doesn't trust you. And so the idea that you're going to make a big gesture, it's romantic comedy logic, kind of, if that makes sense. This idea that they want her to be with them, and she doesn't want to be with them, but they're just determined. It's like, well, she doesn't realize that the relationship she's in now is all wrong for her, and she should really be with us. So we're going to do the big romantic gesture. We're going to hold the immunity idol up over our head, and she'll understand that she should really be with us. Doesn't always really work that way.
Right. But it's a little deeper than that because the people that she trusted, like the gesture saved her from being blindsided from the.
That is absolutely true, because she did actually what would have been voted out otherwise.
Right. So it's more of like Frozen, where you think one side's the good side and that's your prince. This relationship is your Prince Charming, and it turns out no, they were just using you the whole time, and they're absolutely terrible.
As a brief tangent,
and the little guys over here, they're actually the good guys.
As a brief tangent, just related to Frozen, I often enjoy sort of alternate reading, sort of fan theories about movies. I don't buy them necessarily, but it's fun to think about. And one of those is that the real bad guys in Frozen are actually the trolls, because they manipulate the whole situation from the beginning, which they really do if you kind of piece it all together. But this is not a Frozen podcast. If anyone wants to, there is lots of content on the internet explaining that whole theory.
I have, just as a quick aside, since we're on Frozen, I have a feeling that by the time that we get to the next AFI Top 100, there is an outside shot that movie makes it.
I could believe that. Certainly in terms of impact, cultural impact, for sure.
Yes. I think that's going to put it in the conversation, and it will be relevant enough still when they do that, which will probably be next year. Mm-hmm. And it is a quality story. And done animation. I think it creeps in there, and then we would have to watch it, and then we can have that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
I could absolutely talk more about Frozen right now, but let's go ahead and move on back to Survivor. So it was. I think there's room to question the merits of playing the idol on a strategic level, but for sure, one thing that it was absolutely fantastic for was television drama.
Yes, it was entertaining.
Oh man, her face when they were reading all of those Jessica votes does not count, and she's just sitting there goggle-eyed like,
like
what?
Because her whole world just came apart.
I know, what's happening?
She had sold them out thinking that them telling her that her name was going to be written down was some ploy on their part. Yeah. And went and told everybody. Mm-hmm. And then, so she was just like, wow, I misjudged that all the way.
Well, in fairness to her, and maybe we can even just get to this, but I will just also say that Lucy and Sunday were kind of diabolical in their behavior in this episode, and I don't even mean that in like in a admiring way. It was more just kind of like, wow, that's just some really weird behavior, like rationalization of what they did. They go along with the plan, and then they turn around and side with the people that they just betrayed against the person who helped them do what they did. It was weird. It was just like... Anyway.
From her perspective, it didn't... It made more... Her theory of what was going on probably made more sense. Like, hey, these two guys who kind of feel like they're on the outs are trying to make something happen. Mm-hmm. Let me go tell the people I trust that I helped make this other move. Yeah. Because they wouldn't be getting rid of me. Like, I just helped them do what they wanted. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and do it chronological order, but it's interesting in that context that my very first note for the episode is that when watching the recap of the previous episode, I noted it's like interesting that the recap describes voting out Paul as Jessica's plan, because that's certainly not how I had read it at the time. It was one thing to say that she kind of brought in this secondary group. It was like her and Sunday and Lucy, and then you also had Cece, Ken, and Paul that were kind of two separate groups planning the same thing in parallel, and the tension was like, well, are they going to actually be able to get together and trust each other to do this same thing? But to have the recap just simplify it as Jessica's plan to vote out Paul makes it's an interesting spin on that whole situation.
Yes. I think that they probably, I mean, they obviously knew how this was going to end. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that kind of heightens the drama.
Yeah.
To make it look like it was Jessica's plan. So when she gets targeted, like, it makes sense, you know?
Yeah. Well,
if you haven't been like, if you're coming into this as like someone who'd missed last episode, it helps make this one make a little bit more sense, as opposed to it like actually being Jessica's plan. It, you know, it just makes the narrative cleaner in this one in isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things to consider as a possibility too is that it may be that stuff that we didn't see last time would have suggested that she was much more instrumental than we. Like them trying to cover all the angles last week may have conveyed that it was a more group decision when it may really have been that she was kind of the instigator for getting everybody together. It's hard to know.
Yeah, the only reason that I mean, that's an interesting theory. The reason that I would maybe disagree with it, or I do disagree with it, is that if it truly was that, and they knew, because they would have already known how this episode played out too, it would have made sense for them to play that up, because it would have led into this episode, as opposed to like leaving that out.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that that just makes sense to me that they were giving the true sense of what happened, and then they cut the preview or the recap to match what happened in this episode. That just makes more sense to me. Yeah. So that's why I would disagree. But there's no way to know other than yeah.
So coming back from Tribal Council, Chris and Brett are mad, which makes sense. I mean, you could certainly understand from their perspective how this all went down. Not only having one of their allies get voted out, but feeling left out of that decision-making process too. They're afraid for their own position in the game now, and it's just kind of, it's hard to know how serious they are when they imply that they might have been okay with the plan if anyone had just told them. It's like, would you really have, though, or would you have tried to do something to stop it? They were clearly close with Paul, and so I don't think that the others were wrong not to tell them.
Yeah, and, well, I don't think that they would have been on board with it. I think they would have done exactly like what Jessica did in this episode. They just would have gone and told them and say, okay, now here's what's coming. How do we get rid of them now?
Yeah, exactly. And then Paul would have just, he would have just called everybody together in a group and lectured at them for why they shouldn't do it. Yeah.
So part of the other, I was going to add also, part of the other reason why they were so, kind of hurt by it, it has to do with the fact that they were, the way that they were playing and running the tribe was, they had a lot of confidence and ego to, they weren't bullies by any sense, but
they kind of felt like the alpha males. They're the tough guys.
Exactly.
They're alpha. In charge.
Yeah. So they were the alpha males, and now they just got blindsided. Like, that right there makes you a little bit more hurt, Yeah. Because you go from a position of almost, ego power,
right,
into that.
So I don't think their reaction was at all hard to understand or unreasonable. We've talked in the past how, like, from a strategic perspective, it's ideal if you can avoid being too emotional about it. Right. But at the same time, from a kind of a human being perspective, we can absolutely understand why they would feel the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
But this produces in Lucy and Sunday a fear that they may have made a mistake, because maybe what they're doing now, what they're feeling, is that now what's the dynamic with Paul gone is that they kind of like Brett and Chris, but Brett and Chris are mad at them now and they're not sure about, they don't know if they like Cece and David and Ken as much. And then Jessica was kind of, at least they've talked themselves into believing that Jessica was the one that convinced them to do what they did.
Right.
So they're kind of feeling like, well, shoot, we feel like the people we like better are mad at us now. What can we do about that? Can we fix it? And then it starts maybe being clear that, like, well, the only way to fix it might be to have a scapegoat to blame for what happened.
Right.
And to try to go back to them. And, in fairness, it really almost worked. Like Lucy actually says that in her final words, and she has a serious point, is that it really only failed because David did kind of something unpredictable and debatably, it's debatable whether it was the smart thing to do or not.
Right.
It was effective in the short term, but was it the good strategy long term? And if he hadn't done it, if he had played it safe from his own individual game perspective, Lucy's plan would have worked.
Yep.
But so in any case, they Lucy and Sunday approach Brett and Chris with the idea that Jessica is the untrustworthy one. And I'm maybe biased because I didn't like Paul and I wanted Paul to get voted out. I like Brett and Chris okay, but they were on the wrong side.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind them. I don't want them to go per se. But boy, I did not like Sunday and Lucy turning on Jessica like that. I did not like them at all for that.
No, and Lucy in particular, which is why David identified her as like, well, we traded one dictator for the other, because she kind of...
I think Ken said that, but... Ken
said that, yeah, sorry. But yeah, that she was getting kind of bossy, and I hate using that word, but she was being more unpleasant about it than Sunday was, while they were both scheming the same way.
Well, and I understand your hesitation there, that bossy is kind of sometimes there's a connotation to that, especially when you're talking about a woman in charge, right? But she did describe herself as being like a tiger mom, that sort of idea of really being very proactive and micromanaging, deliberately, to control the situation and try to produce the optimal outcome. But it's also something, not everybody enjoys being in that kind of a situation. Whoever is running it.
Yeah. So.
And that was exactly kind of Ken's point, is that what we didn't like about Paul was that he was trying to be in charge and tell us what to do all the time. And now Lucy's trying to do that. She's trying to just fill this power vacuum with herself now. And we voted Paul out because we didn't want that to be centralized at all like that.
Right.
But so in any case, we have a brief interchange at the millennial camp where they decide to go first pig hunting, but they don't see any pigs, and then they see a goat, so they're going to go try to climb up the mountain to see if they can catch this goat. And I loved Adam kind of going, really? What? Oh, okay. I'm going to use the opportunity to go idol hunting some more. But I just loved him just watching them go off into the jungle and just like, what?
Well, a lot of that, the whole dynamic when they're in a good mood, when they're not in the having to vote somebody out mood, was funny. Because like when, I forget who it was, came up on him, it was like, how's the idol hunting going, Adam? Find him?
That was Hannah, yeah.
Yeah, that was Hannah. Not yet. Like, okay.
Working on it. That was pretty funny. And especially just because she then does not approach. She just leaves, and he's all of a sudden paranoid, like, did she just see that I had it, or did she just guess, or... Oh, well. So good for him that he finds it. And it's kind of funny too, just given that he was the one. It's probably not a coincidence that the time that we previously got a hint at where it was hidden was a time that Adam was kind of walking by it on the beach, and so ultimately he finds it. And he actually gave us a rare little bit of insight, just in terms of commenting that the enthusiasm for idol hunting seemed to have died down at the camp. So, like, if it was still happening in any concerted way, people were doing it more in secret. Not always successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I liked her response to it, because instead of being like, oh, Adam's being sketchy and he's looking for an idol, and like, putting this whole thing when everyone else has been doing it too, which is what normally happens. They're like, ooh, Adam's been gone a while, but he's looking for an idol. Ooh, he's so sketchy, and they even though they've been doing it, the fact that she just sort of joyfully was like, hey, I know what you're doing, so I'm going to keep an eye on you.
There's
I'm not going to bother you. I'm not going to make you uncomfortable. I'm not going to go sketch everybody out. But just, hey, I know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think that in some ways, although Hannah can be awkward, she and Adam kind of have a similar mindset, I think, when it comes to that sort of thing, just in the sense that they're kind of on the same page with, well, yeah, why wouldn't you look for the idol? Would be great to find one, wouldn't it? That's part of the game. You're here on Survivor, you look for the idol. Why would you not? And so I think that, just the humor of just literally calling it out is pretty funny. Yes. It does just remind me how, like, you kind of mentioned it, the times in the past when people act like it's somehow an untrustworthy thing to go idol hunting. And there's kind of a hypocrisy there, because anytime someone is trying to phrase it in that way, to pitch, oh, idol hunting, it makes you untrustworthy, what really that means is, we don't want you to have an idol. So we want there to be a reason that you shouldn't look for one.
Right.
And then it's a rationalization from there. Which is not to say that you don't, making a big deal of looking for the idol all the time to the point where the others notice, that doesn't make that strategically beneficial. But there is also just some hypocrisy in the idea of portraying an idol search as somehow, sketchy.
Yeah. That's
silly. Anyone, even if they're in a solid alliance, should be interested in finding the idol. It's helpful for anyone. But in any case, finding the idol kind of gets him to sort of a moment of catharsis where he's emotional about his mom's cancer. And it's kind of touching, and it's interesting, puts an interesting spin on this. Lots of people say it feels kind of surreal or to be on Survivor, but he's kind of just like something that was kind of like my greatest dream and my worst nightmare are happening at the same time. And it leaves you kind of in this emotional, this place of well, how can you feel sad? You're on Survivor, but then how can you feel happy if your mom's got cancer? You could have that kind of flip-flopping in your head all constantly.
Yeah.
He's been holding it together pretty well, considering.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it takes things like that, for it to sort of come out, because you are holding it together. Then you have this emotional release, whether it's joy or anything, and all the other emotions that you've been holding together come with it, because you've uncorked it essentially. So it makes sense. I totally understand that's why that happened. I mean, I've had that situation. I mean, I think we all have probably been, when you just have so many stressors.
This is a breakthrough.
Yeah, and then there's something could happen that's a happy thing.
Well, because we get into these mental patterns of how we compartmentalize and control our emotional responses to something that's an ongoing stress, right? You develop these little coping mechanisms, and then when something disrupts your routine in any way, it just kind of throws everything off balance.
Yep.
Yeah. So technically, he didn't find the idol until after the reward challenge. So let's talk about that. So our first reward-only challenge of the season.
We're only in episode 4?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's...
feels about right.
That's been the pattern in the last several seasons. I think that they have rightly discovered that when you have so many more people still on the show, because it's early in the season, you get to know them quicker if you're not spending as much screen time on challenges.
Yeah, I think they've settled into a pattern of, opening episode is an hour and a half long, so you get sort of a half hour of character review, then an hour of actually like getting to know people at the beginning, and then it goes into reward immunity together for the next 2 to 3 episodes, and then it falls into its normal pattern. I've liked it. I think it has worked in combination with what we talked about last week of people playing more aggressively early and not being willing to just like, oh, we're comfortable, let's just keep the 4 of us just voting everybody out until it's too late, until we can't do that anymore. So when you add that to the way that they've made the exposition of the seasons a lot more interesting with this pattern, it has led to a more complete season all the time now. I like how it's all working,
Well, it's an illustration of...
From an entertainment perspective, it's a more...
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just going to say it's an illustration of the subtle work that the producers have been doing to keep the show evolving and fresh rather than stale after 33 seasons.
Yep.
So in any case, though, this is the rough reward water challenge in order to get, steaks and sausages and spices and picnic stuff. It's a pretty intense kind of nail biter finish, so distracting that at least if the editing is to be believed, Probst was so focused that he lets himself get just slammed by a cresting wave.
Yes.
I thought that was pretty funny. And boy, Michaela has to be MVP, right? Just in terms of powering through.
Yes.
Even I liked her attitude about it later. It's like, sometimes you just have to decide whether to lose and or to win and lose your top. And I made my decision.
Yep.
So ultimately, though, it was actually the other tribe that won it in the end, but there wasn't as obvious a star, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I always get these two confused, but which one's the larger redheaded dude?
That's
Brian?
That's Chris, and
Chris,
then Brett.
Chris was probably Chris was probably as close as anything to their MVP. I mean, he was. They had a lot of good players, but he was very much a stalwart in the fact that like they couldn't move him.
Well, he's just massive that it's hard. He is able to just kind of drag people along. He's strong, and he's big enough that it's hard for people to move him if he doesn't want to be moved.
Yes. And he used a couple of different strategies depending on who his opponents were, which I liked. There was the one where they kind of held back while the millennials, flew to the whatever it was, got it, or coming back, and he just went and just took it from the dude and threw it to David, I think, and just held everybody there while David just ran off by himself. And there were other times where they actually went and then got into that scrum, and then he just dragged the scrum to the pole.
Yeah.
So there was, like I said, I think he was their key piece to making sure they won. He wasn't standing out far and above the way that Michaela did.
Yeah. Well, so maybe we could say that he was his team's MVP, but play of the game, I think, still goes to Michaela.
That's fair.
So it was a tense finish there. I liked this challenge and how much of an impact the surf had on it, having to navigate those swelling waves going through.
Well, it felt like there was a couple of times where they took advantage of it correctly. You know, like they would get the swell. I think the millennials did that once.
Mm-hmm.
The swell came and kind of was pushing towards theirs, and they kind of rode, like instead of fighting it, they rode it and took the whole pile of people whole, you know. So it had some impact that way as well.
Yeah, it was neat. I liked this challenge. It's interesting just because I sometimes feel like the rougher ones like this, I'm not always as enthusiastic about. Maybe just because I'm worried about people getting hurt.
Yeah.
But this one was fun. Maybe the water softened that element a bit. But anyway, so that Gen X wins the sausages and spices and stuff. And so it was after this that Adam found the idol, but we kind of talked about that already. And then over at the Gen X tribe before the immunity challenge, this is where we have David approaching Lucy to kind of check in and say, so, you know, where are we going from here? What's the plan? And she's basically just saying, I'm not going to tell you a name until later, but don't worry, it's not you guys. And see, and then also like makes a big deal about, and don't talk to anyone else, because if I see you talking to anyone else, we'll know you can't be trusted. And like, I mean, I was glad to see that in her final words that she recognized that it was maybe some of her own behavior that provoked this. But I absolutely believe that if things would not have played out the way they did if she had been more solicitous. Like, even if her strategy was the same, but she was just more diplomatic with them instead of dictatorial.
Right. And so, you know, let's talk about, they're all Gen Xers. So, you know, regardless of the label connotation, what that means is they're all adults.
Yeah.
Like, these are adult people. Like, don't talk to them like that. Like, these aren't kids. These aren't, you know, young people right out of college. These aren't your kids. Like, these are other adults. These are your peers. Don't act like that, you know?
They're your equals in this game. Their vote counts just as much as yours.
Yes.
And it's just, the way she treated them was really just, it was unreasonable. And like, to hear her tell it later, and I don't know how much of this is rationalization and how much is what she really was thinking at the time, was that she was just making it easy for them. She was trying to actually be sincere in saying, you guys, don't worry about it. It's not going to be you, so you just can relax and let me take control of it. And just not
even
grasping what...
Sorry, go ahead.
She is clearly wrong to do that. I'm just trying to get inside her head in terms of what was she thinking during that section, because it's just so obvious from the outside how that was going to rub them the wrong way.
Yeah. And that's what I say, even if that is truly what she was thinking, which I understand you were just trying to get in her head.
Yeah.
It's still so wrong, because what you're implying is, I need to make it easy for the people on the bottom who don't really have a say in this. Let's just make sure they understand, like, they're safe, because they're going to be the ones panicking because they have no say.
Yeah.
And so she set it up, and that it's part of what got David. I mean, we saw. It's not like David's paranoia went away just because he stopped, you know, saying it out loud so much. You know, it's still a part of who he is, and it's still a part of why he played that idol, because from that moment he was told, you don't have a say. And he was like, you know what? I do. Yeah. And that's part of why he chose to do it right now. And you know, as I was starting to think through this, okay, there was a little bit of an emotional reaction now. It wasn't just like, hey, we want to make sure we have Jessica on our side. Like, it wasn't all strategic, which, you know, strategically, if it works, it makes sense, because now it becomes 3-3 if if they stay in their groups, but it also disrupts all the groups. So it could be very good for him strategically if it goes the way he wants. It could also not work the way he wants, which is the risk. But I think now that especially reliving that moment, there is definitely an emotional piece to this of, you're going to tell me I don't have a say, I'm going to tell you I do.
Yeah.
Because I'm starting to get some confidence now. So I still have my paranoia, but now it's not from a position of weakness. Now I want to use my paranoia and put myself in a position of strength. And that's what he was able to do at that tribal council. So, yeah, I hadn't thought through all that until you just went through that scene again. And I guarantee that was part of his decision making.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure it was. And it's so often in this game, it really comes down to that idea of how much of what you're doing is really strategy and how much of it is rationalization to try to come up with a strategic explanation for your emotional reaction. Although in this case, I mean, there's a case to be made for the strategy of it too, because on the one hand, like, do you want to count on there being a mix-up? And what if the mix-up is you end up with Lucy separated from, you know, your other allies and you're just on the bottom again? Or the idea that if you potentially could have an ally in Jessica and you let them vote off Jessica, and now Lucy's made it clear that you're on the bottom, why wouldn't you be next?
Right. And that's why, from a strategic perspective, it does make some sense. Like, it's not like it was completely irrational.
Right.
They would have been a guaranteed in the way that things were playing out, a 4-2.
Yeah.
You know, even though they would have voted with the 4, they were separated from the decision-making process. Based on Lucy had explained that to them, like, you are not a part of this decision-making.
Technically 3, because we keep talking about David and Ken, but Cece is technically part of that block, even though we don't see her discussing it very much.
So it actually makes even more sense strategically, because it sets them up as 4 versus 3 now if Jessica joins them.
Yeah. We don't see Cece participating in the strategy as much, but she definitely still seems to be part of that block.
Yeah.
Although in this case, I think that she maybe you know what? I didn't even look it up to see who she voted for this time. I had been thinking of her as part of that block, but I think we only saw 2 votes for Lucy red. Reviver.
But that would have been her and David.
Well, I was thinking it was Ken and David.
No, Ken voted for Jennifer. That's why he looked at him weird.
Yeah, you're right. Ken did vote for Jessica.
For Jessica. That's why he looked at him weird when he played his idol. Yeah. He didn't know he was going to do it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I didn't pick up on that. I assumed that those 2 were still together on that. But yeah, the 2 votes for Lucy were Cece and David, and then Jessica was the one who voted for Cece because, of course, that's what she thought her alliance was doing. And I guess given that without knowing what David was going to do, and probably David didn't even know, it seems like it was kind of a impulse even in the moment. Like he had maybe considered that it was possible, but I don't think he really decided until right there. You could even see him kind of wavering even as he got up to do it. He was very nervous about doing it, obviously. And so in that context, you can understand Ken's position of just sort of saying, we don't have the numbers. And so that was even my note when Lucy had made kind of this power move with them of like, don't talk to anyone, which is to say,
I'm here.
I can understand you guys where we're like David and Ken is like, okay, yeah, you're unhappy with this situation, but you don't have the numbers. Because if Lucy and Sunday and Brett and Chris maybe have Jessica too, and then that's against David, Ken, Cece, what are you going to do? Even if you get Jessica to go with you, that's still only 4-4.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough position to be in. And it's like, what are you going to do? And so really what David did was the only move that does not just allow yourself to be subsumed into the bottom of this larger block.
Yep.
Let's see. So that brings us to the immunity challenge. It was kind of fascinating that the Gen X tribe chose to put their biggest guy in the chair that everybody else then had to lift and maneuver around, and yet he still did it faster than the other tribe.
Yeah, I think it seemed like that at first, but then you almost wonder if it's actually easier to maneuver it because it moves incrementally, like, slower. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to be a little bit more precise.
Yeah, I don't know that they need the chair to be that precise, though, because he's scooting around on the bench and reaching for the stuff, right? They don't need the bench to be that precise. They can just get it within arm's reach. He can move on it.
That's true. Well, maybe him being larger allowed him to reach more from a more general position than having to, move it multiple times. You couldn't really tell, at least not that I remember.
Right. Well, obviously you can't quite argue with results either because they did it faster than the other tribe.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what was the impact there. It was just it was counterintuitive to what I would have been thinking as a strategy, which is that you put your lighter person there just so it's easier for everybody to lift. But then I suppose if you've got like 6 or 7 people trying to lift one guy on the bench, maybe the difference between a bigger guy and a smaller person is not going to be that.
Yeah, maybe what their plan was let's put the person with the largest wingspan essentially and reach the maximum amount of numbers from, we don't have to be, to your point, you don't have to be as precise if he can reach farther.
Yeah. Yeah. It also might have been a who wants to do it thing. You know what I mean? So maybe it may have been that they didn't necessarily put a lot of strategic thought into it as much as he volunteered and nobody argued. Because I could understand like not everybody wanting to do that job. You know what I mean? Be hoisted up there. I mean, I'm sure that the rig had safety mechanisms on it that would have kept it just from dropping to the ground, in free fall. But even still, people don't especially like heights. It wouldn't necessarily be the fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But so anyway, Gen X has a slight lead going into the puzzle, and once again, like many puzzle challenges, who cares that they had an extra 30 seconds going into the puzzle, because 45 minutes later, they're both still working on it. It was interesting that lots of times we see these challenges where it's 2 phases, but then the puzzle ends up just taking so much longer that it's really debatable whether the first stage really had any impact at all.
Right.
Is it kind of its impact on the result is almost moot. But in any case, millennials ended up, getting to the right answer quicker, so they won. And so going back to camp, Brett and Chris are nervous, and we can understand where that's coming from because, for all they know, Lucy telling them that Jessica going out is that's the story, just like last time they didn't realize it was going to be Paul, So they're not sure that they're not being deceived just like the week before, which is a reasonable concern. And then Lucy, this is where she talks about her tiger mom approach. But I think what just rubs the wrong way so much is exactly what you were saying earlier, is that these are not children. And they're not, especially they're not her children.
Right.
You know, she's not treating them as equals, which, you know, maybe assuages her ego. But I also feel like she really didn't seem like, it would be one thing if it was a deliberate power move, like in a conscious way of trying to make it like to degrade the ego of your opposition so they don't try anything. Like if that was the idea. Yeah, but it really it didn't feel like that. What it really just felt like is that that's how she's used to operating, and it did not occur to her to think that they would not appreciate it. You know, she might even, if she had thought about it at all, she might have said, well, they may not like how blunt I am, but they'll do what they're told. Because why wouldn't they? It's the smart thing to do. They're not the ones on the chopping block. And that seems to be her Band-Aid over all of the cracks in her plan there, was just the idea of, why would they go against this plan? It's not their names being written down. I'm telling them the truth when I tell them they don't have to worry. You know, so I think that must have been what she was thinking. But boy, I tell you, in some of that stuff in the tribal council where she was talking about, like, you know, men have told me that they appreciate my bluntness. And I'm thinking, well, there might be some circumstances where that has happened. But if you talk to everyone in your life the way you talked to David and Ken, then I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't appreciate it.
Yes.
And it may just be that those people never talk to you about it. Because they feel like you are not approachable or open to conversation.
Yes.
Anyway, it was a risky situation because, you know, for this trio of Ken, David, and Cece, as we talked about, it's like they want to save Jessica, but Jessica doesn't seem to believe them. And yet, even if they convince her, it's still only potentially a 4-4 tie because Lucy, Sunday, Brett, and Chris seem really solid.
Yeah, so, I mean, didn't they talk at one point? I remember about, like, hoping that she would then bring, I think, Sunday along.
Yeah. Well, like, that was their hope, but I think it was grasping at straws because they obviously didn't even have Jessica on their side at that point. And I said, seems like a long shot to me in my notes at that point. And so, like, Ken tells Jessica that she's shocked. And so it's interesting. Like I want to, let's put ourselves in Jessica's shoes for a moment here. Like, obviously, from our perspective, as you know, sitting at home, we know that Ken and David are telling the truth, and that Lucy and Sunday are planning to vote out Jessica. But from Jessica's perspective, I can see, it's like what we talked about a little bit earlier, is like, from her perspective, if she didn't pick up on some false note from other people, and it's just looking at it from a slightly more abstract perspective, she's got to be thinking, why would Sunday and Lucy do that? We just teamed up to take out Paul last time. Why would they then turn on me and side with the people that we were against last time?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So we can understand, like, that's why this section of the episode was so frustrating to watch, because I could understand why she might do what she did, and yet it's like watching a horror movie. Don't go in that door. Don't go in that door. Don't go in the basement. The killer's down there. And so having her just immediately go to Lucy about what Ken said, and it's And then, of course, Ken has, he's an interesting guy. Like because even when he is clearly reacting out of emotion and going to have it out with Lucy in the middle of camp, like even then he still talks like he's having a very patient conversation. And it's that kind of very measured way of, very deliberate way of speaking that he has.
Yeah.
But it's funny at this point. Is like going into tribal council, Lucy is she's stunned that why would Ken make trouble like this if he's not the target? I don't get it. She's just not picking up that. It's like you treated him like a child, told him that his voice was not welcome or needed. And and so it's like, why would he not believe that you're going to take him out next, even if it's not him this time? You've given him every indication of that being the exact case. But so, in any case, going into tribal council, I was saying still looks bad for Jessica. And I said, maybe for Ken, especially just for kind of causing that whole thing. But I didn't think they were going to change the plan away from Jessica.
Right.
So I loved the moment in tribal council where Ken kind of calls out Jessica in frustration for like, I opened up to you and tried to tell you about a threat to you in this game, and you just turned around and betrayed me to the people plotting against you. And she's like, what? I was just supposed to trust you? And he just looks right in the eye and says, yes. And then you could see that she's kind of shaken by that, like, oh.
Oh.
I think I might believe him now.
Yeah.
That was a great moment because she was totally spooked, like for everything after that.
Yeah. Especially when her name started getting read.
Yeah, and like her, like kind of talked about this already, but just her face when they're reading those votes was incredible. She just wide eyes, not saying a word. And then eventually, as they're walking out, she manages kind of a whispered, like, "Thank you." It's like, yeah, you're welcome.
You could have just listened to us,
It could have been a lot easier, Yeah. Although, again, I suppose technically
easier. She would have had to go try to do something, but yeah.
Yeah, they like even if she had joined them, it still would have been a tricky numbers thing. But they could have tried something. They could have worked on something. But in any case, it does potentially still make it difficult. Because even if we say, okay, maybe Ken, David, Cece, and Jessica are a unit now, Sunday, Brett, like they're not that tight a unit necessarily. And we're potentially heading into a mix-up. So
yes,
who knows what could happen there. Because it's this two alliances are kind of evenly balanced enough that if you ended up with a new tribe that has Brett and Chris and Sunday and David on it, that could still go very badly.
Yes.
But so that's the luck of the draw, though. That's how it works for Survivor. I kind of love David playing the idol from a TV perspective. I think, as we've talked about already, strategically, I think you can make a case for it, but you could also certainly make a case for holding on to it for his own use would have been a safer play for him, especially given going into the tribe mix-up, and that it's not a guarantee that she's going to be as appreciative as you might hope, given that she turned on you the last time.
Right.
So who knows? But I guess we'll see next time. in the preview for next time, makes a point of now that it's been played, the Gen X idol will be back up for grabs, and then they make such a big deal about, oh no, the tribe swap might split up our lovebird couple of Taylor and Figgy. Won't that be sad?
Yeah, that'll be so sad.
And then in her final words, despite, I think, some poor play and some poor attitude on her part during the episode, I think that Lucy did seem to hit the right notes in her final words, in the sense of acknowledging that it was probably her behavior that contributed to this, and then also having a legit point that this plan almost worked, and it was really only David doing something surprising like this that stopped it.
This is true.
This is why big moves are exciting in the game, is because they change up things that seem certain otherwise.
Yep.
All right. So, any other notes on this episode?
No, that covers everything for me.
All right, great. So, I think that'll do it for this episode, and we'll be back next week to talk about episode 5 and the tribe mix-up. We'll see where everybody lands. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching, and we'll be back next week.
Yep. All right.